Okay, it is Sunday, April 20th, and I don't care if you are blazed out of your gourd, if you are hanging out with your family after Easter church service, if you are making yourself sick to your stomach, gorging on peeps. I want you to ignore those unhinged tweets from MAGA chud podcasters like Jesse Kelly saying that the Supreme Court should be dissolved. Fascists are going to do a fascism anytime they can. Don't be harsh in your buzz. Don't be crashing your sugar high. Don't listen to those guys. I want you to listen right here. Listen to me. I'm going to talk to you about how to save our democracy. I'm going to share a little bit with you from an article in Foreign Affairs that came out the end of March. It's by Laura Gamboa. The article is titled, How to Save Democracy. Americans Can Learn from Opponents of Authoritarianism Elsewhere. Gamboa is a professor of democracy and global affairs at Notre Dame. She wrote a book called Resisting Backsliding. This is her wheelhouse, and you want to listen to what she has to say. Okay, the first few weeks of Donald Trump's second presidency have accelerated the process of democratic erosion in the United States. In just 2 months, the president and his allies have issued executive orders of dubious constitutionality, violated the civil protections of federal workers, impinged upon Congress's powers over the budget, sidestepped and defied court rulings. That's obviously gotten a lot worse since this was written 20 days ago. They have used the Justice Department to punish opponents and protect loyalists, threatened to impeach judges who rule against the administration regime, weaponized U.S. immigration and customs enforcement and immigration law to imprison and deport documented migrants without due process, and have allowed unappointed individuals, that means Elon Musk and his band of Shitler youth, unprecedented and potentially illegal levels of access and power over key agencies. Democratic erosion has not progressed as far in the United States as it has in many other countries, but that does not make the steps the Trump administration regime has taken any less concerning. At a minimum, democracy should afford citizens the opportunity to form and express their preferences and have them weighted equally in government. To do so, citizens must enjoy individual rights, such as freedom of association, freedom of expression, and freedom of movement. Checks and balances exist to guarantee those rights. They are meant to prevent abuses that, under the guise of majoritarian support, could limit citizens' ability to participate in government on an equal footing. The Trump regime's willingness to bypass the law, defy courts, and weaponize state institutions to punish opponents threatens that political participation, and in doing so threatens democracy. For democracy to survive, it must be protected. In the past few decades, in countries such as Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and Poland, opposition groups pushed back successfully against leaders with authoritarian tendencies when it was early in the process of democratic backsliding, when they still had institutional levers to pull. But in other cases, such as Bolivia, El Salvador, Turkey, and Venezuela, oppositions either failed to act with sufficient urgency or used tactics that lost them their institutional levers, gradually hindering their ability to resist. In the United States, the opposition's response to the threat so far has been underwhelming. Again, this was published before 5.2 million people turned out on April 5th, and over 4 million people turned out yesterday to vigorously protest the authoritarian regime of Donald Trump. Reeling from electoral defeat and shocked by the blitz of the Trump regime's power grabs, politicians and civil society groups are uncertain about the path forward and hesitant to take bold steps. Again, we have seen bold steps since then, and we are going to see some more very soon. This delay is costly. If American democracy is to prevail, pro-democracy forces must follow the handbook that has enabled oppositions to stop would-be autocrats in other countries. They should coordinate to defend and expand their institutional powers while they have them, wield them to obstruct Trump's authoritarian agenda. Chuck Schumer, I'm looking at you, you impotent motherfucker. Strengthen grassroots resistance efforts, we're doing that, and protect the activists, office holders, and other individuals exposed to retribution from the regime. The alternative may be that democracy slips while we all wait. Don't throw away your shot. Because the erosion of democracy happens gradually, the opposition has ample opportunities to fight back. Even though this feels like it's happening at a really rapid pace, it is still unfolding in a way where we can jump in at any point in time and stop it. In the United States, opposition groups are not without resources. The Democratic Party holds a non-trivial number of seats in Congress, and state legislators and gubernatorial and mayoral offices also have controls. Politicians and other pro-democracy forces have access to independent courts with oversight and agencies at the national, state, and municipal levels, as well as independent media outlets, economic resources, and well-organized grassroots organizations. All of this provides leverage to counter Trump's anti-democratic policies. Unsure about the level of threat the administration's moves pose, some members of the Democratic Party, media outlets, and other institutions believe they can afford to wait. They assume the political situation will just change with new elections, and that's what we've seen from the Democratic leadership. We'll just fix it in the midterms. Instead of leveraging their resources to make a stand and hamper, if even marginally, the administration's power grabs, they have opted to accommodate it by helping confirm controversial nominees, collaborating to pass a funding bill without safeguards protecting Congress's powers of the purse or limits on the dismantling of bureaucracy, and acquiescing to demands to support the government's agenda when faced with financial threats. There are still Democrats in the House and the Senate that are voting for Trump's bills, that are voting to confirm his nominees. Still, this week, there are still Democrats who refuse to hold the line. And all of the Republicans are actively supporting this fascist regime. They are all collaborators at this point. I don't care if they tell me they're scared and they don't really want to vote with Trump. They know it's wrong. They're doing it anyway. The author does point out we are seeing Democratic governors and members of Congress who have demanded a blanket obstruction of the Trump regime's agenda. That's the right move. Gamboa goes on to talk about how in Turkey, folks waited too long to respond. They did not take the threat seriously enough. But in Venezuela, the opposition overplayed their hand and drained their resources. So we have to balance acting immediately with using tactics that will be successful and not overly draining ourselves. The author says pro-democracy politicians and civil society groups in the U.S. need to play the long game better than their counterparts in Venezuela did. That means finding ways to preserve and ideally increase their presence in elected and non-elected bodies on the state, national, and local levels. This includes supporting competitive candidates in Democratic-leaning districts and making headway in Republican-leaning areas, defending judges and courts that uphold democratic principles, and signaling approval and support for independent and Republican politicians willing to stand up for democracy. Remember when I said we need a broad-based coalition and purity politics are going to screw us over? We're going to have to ally with people that we don't even really like that much, but if they are willing to hold the line for democracy with us, we have got to ally with them. Use what you've got. Oppositions need to not only protect the institutional resources we have, but also use them to delay, obstruct, and if possible, stop the incumbent's consolidation of power. Colombia's opposition did this to effectively stop democratic erosion. President Uribe introduced legislation that sought to increase the powers of the executive to undermine the courts and Congress and co-opt oversight agencies. Sounds a lot like what Trump is doing. Despite holding only a minority of seats in Congress, Democrats, opposition parties were able to use procedural maneuvers to block and modify those reforms. Thanks to the opposition's efforts, anti-democratic bills were either delayed, diluted, or saddled with procedural irregularities that made them easy targets for lawsuits. Are you listening, Democrats? Next, get out in the streets. Although institutional tactics are important, they are not always enough to preserve democracy. Nonviolent struggle is another powerful tool. Well-organized social movements and civil society groups can shelter democratic institutions, mobilize voters, and increase the costs of anti-democratic behavior. A well-organized nonviolent movement can be particularly effective at combating an incumbent in an unfair election. In Serbia, the student movement was key to overthrowing brutal ruler Slobodan Milosevic in October 2000. Ahead of the elections, the student group Otpor worked with the Center for Free Elections and Democracy. They registered voters, they distributed electoral information, they had creative campaigns. So Milosevic lost the election, but he then refused to concede. That student group Otpor, they were ready. They demanded a parallel vote count that confirmed the opposition's candidate actually won. And they were able to quickly call thousands of citizens to the streets to defend free and fair elections and the correct results. Social mobilization alone does not always work. According to Dr. Erica Chenoweth, I love their research, 40% of nonviolent movements between 1960 and 2010 have achieved their aims. Protesters must use creative tactics, stay active for long periods, and retain public support by eschewing violence, even when faced with government repression. Investing in grassroots movements now will pay off later, especially if the incumbent engages in gerrymandering, co-opted electoral authorities, and purges the voter rolls, or implements laws that will make it hard to vote. Oh, the SAVE Act. But if the infrastructure is put in place now, we can mobilize and boost voter turnout on election day and demand voters' choices are respected afterward. Fighting against democratic backsliding is not easy, y'all. There will be many people who, rather from direct pressure, like lawsuits, tax audits, criminal investigations, or sheer exhaustion, they give up fighting. Grassroots organizations need to provide a replenishable pool of politicians and activists. Democracy in the U.S. is facing a serious threat, but the case is not hopeless. Its defenders have a wide array of levers that we can pull to oppose Trump and his allies' attempts to consolidate power. If pro-democracy forces act quickly to protect our resources and use them wisely, we can slow down this march and give American democracy a fighting chance. We know what the tools are. We are starting to use them, but we have got to pick up the pace. We can't let Trump write our future. We need to be the ones who write it.